Hello and welcome to our Teen Anxiety and Self-Esteem Confidence webinar. I have an actual PowerPoint to rock with this for us today, and super excited to get through this because it's a topic that we continue to see more and more start to play into the teens and even younger kids in our community, in our office. We're hearing the same stories over and over again with kids that are struggling with anxiety. So I want to take a few minutes with you today, and I want to go over the top 5 signs of anxiety in kids, and then I also want to give you some tips and tools to be able to get ahead of it and make a plan and really start to get help for kids so that they can start to thrive and really just continue to do better and better in the environments that they're in. So let's just get started. My name is Dr. Jeremy Fowle. I'm a chiropractor, pediatric and family chiropractor here in Plymouth, Minnesota, and I have been working with kids for now going on 9 years in practice. Our office here is about 45% pediatrics, and it is just such a joy to be able to see kids thriving in an environment where they currently or previously weren't. To be able to see kids go from a high-stressed, high-energy state to calm, and just bring that to an entire family, which becomes really, really exciting for us as an office to be able to help families through that. And especially in the times that we're in right now, with so much uncertainty and so much change happening with the school systems and kids and their daily structure in life and sports and activities, and everything's different. It becomes even more and more important to help these kids through it. So you really start to think about what's at stake for kids when we're dealing with anxiety. We start to think about so much stress on their bodies and on their nervous systems and on their brains at such a young age, and then it doesn't really change. Right? If we don't get ahead of it, it doesn't move. Anxiety doesn't just move from kids with anxiety to teenagers that are just fine. We see, and if you tuned into our webinar last week, we talked a lot about that transition from kids with anxiety, high stress kids with anxiety that move into teens with depression, that might move into young adults that deal with fertility issues or other things. How does stress continue to compile on top of stress and really start to affect how the body works and how the body functions? Because what we know is that stress it's a normal thing, right? We're all exposed to stress every single day, but it's the perception of stress and how does our nervous system and how do our brains and bodies handle the stress that we are under, and those cycles of stress, and how deeply does it imprint into your nervous system. So I have some notes we're going to be digging right in. I want to talk right away on the top 5 signs of anxiety and stress in kids. And the number one thing that we see kind of across the board is sleep issues. When kids deal with anxiety, it's like taking their gas pedal and just starting to push the gas pedal down on a pretty consistent basis. So when that happens, it's almost like these kids that they start bedtime routine at 7:45 and it's 10 o'clock and they're still laying in their bed. They can't shut their brains off. They have a really, really hard time falling to sleep. They can't turn it off. They can't turn that stress mechanism. They can't turn it down. There's very little motivation in kids that are dealing with really high anxiety, especially in the mornings. If they're not falling asleep well, if they're up really late because they can't turn their brain off, then all of a sudden it takes that much longer to get back into the flow of the day. So we start to see that they're waking up multiple times, they're unable to get restful sleep, which really starts to carry into the next day and becomes a vicious cycle that they start to pattern into. Like I said, the gas pedal analogy is one of my favorite things that we talk through. It's on all of our paperwork that we go over with parents because it just fits so perfectly with what's going on in the brains and nervous systems of a kid that deals with anxiety, and that you'll see that with all of the different stressors that we all deal with every single day, whether it's a physical stress or a trauma, whether it's a chemical stress, something that creates toxicity within the body, or it's emotional stress and thoughts, which is just incredibly high right now across the board. All of those stressors are like taking your gas pedal and just moving it a little bit and a little bit and a little bit and a little bit. And all of those little bits continue to add up and shift our bodies into this sympathetic fight or flight state. Almost everybody that we talk to in our office has heard of the body's fight or flight response. And that response is a hardwired physiological response to stress. It's really for survival. And when we live in it, when we live in a sympathetic response all day long, our body starts to work in a very different fashion, right? It starts to change in the way that it fires physiologically inside, right? When your body's in a fight or flight response, your digestion doesn't work normally, your immune function doesn't work normally, your endocrine and hormonal system don't work normally. They don't work in a state that they would if you were in a very adaptive state that isn't stuck in a fight or flight response. So our primary goal when we work with these kids is how do we get their bodies out of that sympathetic state? How do we take their foot off of the gas pedal? Let's see if I'm over here. How do we take their body off of the gas pedal, allow the brakes to start to work again so that they can rest, so that they can digest, so that they can move through life in a greater sense of ease. The next piece that we start to see with kids with anxiety is this instability of emotions, this roller coaster of emotions that kids deal with. It almost seems like, 1 minute they're just fine, and the smallest thing can set them off, and it just throws them, for a loop, and they have a really, really hard time pulling themselves out of it. Almost like the flip of a switch, like it says on here. Reactions to different stimulus can be seemingly completely overboard and extreme. They become more and more sensitive. And it's like when your gas pedal's already down, it doesn't take a whole lot to rev the engine that much higher. We start to see this phenomenon that it says on here, emotional age versus physical age, and that when we become stressed, it's almost like it separates. We have this physical age, maybe we're 15, 16 years old, and when we get really stressed, all of a sudden it's like we revert backwards. We revert backwards to a younger age where we're no longer in the emotional control like we should have. So if you're seeing those types of things, chances are your kids are dealing with some underlying anxiousness and anxiety that their nervous system is not accurately perceiving what's happening around them. We start to see kids becoming very rigid, inflexible in their routines, inflexible in their ability to handle what happens. This can sometimes just look like, I'm a very type A personality that they put a lot of self-pressure on themselves, a lot of performance pressure. They're very, very high-achieving kids that all of a sudden when they start to deal with all of this anxiety, they start to let all this negative self-talk come in. They have all of these high pressure and high standards on themselves, and they don't always meet up to that. And it can become a very self-defeating thing when they don't live up to their own expectations. And sometimes these aren't the expectations that parents and teachers have. It's just this anxiety of needing to be at a certain level that they put on themselves. They can become very, very aggravated and high-strung, very defensive in response to parents, in response to teachers, and the pressures of what needs to get done. And we're starting to see this right now as so many kids are at home doing school online. They're more and more combative with parents. And some of that can just be the nature of the beast of what's happening with having to learn an entire new system of education, an entire new way of learning, and the stress of having to adapt to that basically on the fly. But we're seeing that they go right into this fight or flight reaction a whole lot sooner, right? All of a sudden they don't get it right the first time, and like we said, emotions come off the handle. With this, we start to see things like more obsessive compulsive tendencies, more repetition, more patterns of behavior that really are starting to become more and more unhealthy. And so those are things that we really want to watch out for. The next thing that we're starting to see as a sign of anxiety with kids is stomach and immune challenges. And a lot of people don't tie these two things together, but when you start to talk about what stress does and where it goes when we get stuck in that fight or flight state, it makes perfect sense because our bodies have this mechanism for survival. And like I said, when you get that gas pedal that starts to push down and our body starts to really rev into that sympathetic shift, that sympathetic nervous system of fight or flight, it down regulates, almost like turns down the dimmer switch on digestion and immune function and endocrine systems, like it says right on here. And so all of those systems don't work to the capacity that they were before, because when you're in survival mode, you don't need to be digesting food. When you're in survival mode, you don't need your immune system to be worried about the immediacy of a cold or a flu or a viral thing that's happening, because you're in fight or flight survival mode in that moment. So the danger then becomes, if you're there for a prolonged period of time, that these systems downregulate for longer and longer. So when we start having chronic stomach aches with kids, chronic digestive issues, whether it's alternating constipation, diarrhea, which we see a lot, it's this digestive system that's upregulated, downregulated, upregulated, downregulated. The kids that are constantly getting sick, it seems like they're getting every single cold, every single year they get the flu or they get strep. It's like everything that maybe your other kids don't get, or maybe their friends aren't getting to the same level that they are. Chances are their nervous system is not sitting in a balanced state, so their body's not regulating those systems the way that they should be. It's, like I said, it's rampant. It's something that we see pretty chronically. Almost all of the kids that we deal with anxiety are dealing with some type of issue that goes along with it. And like I was saying before, when your nervous system is under stress, all of these different things can happen. This is what we call our Spinal Fuse Box sheet when we go through and we look at all the different systems in the body. And subluxation, it says on the top, is really what we look for as chiropractors, and it's that there's a nervous system interference. And when there's interference to the nervous system, our body starts to process stress pretty much on a constant basis. The last thing that we're seeing on here, the last sign that we see of anxiety in kids is that self-esteem, low self-esteem and confidence. If you had a child that used to be very, very comfortable with themselves, very, very confident, maybe they were really, confident and comfortable within their social groups, and all of these things start to change. We start to have more social challenges with awareness and interactions that can be difficult. Almost like they start to live within their own bubble and have some more isolation. They have more and more pressures that they put on themselves, like we talked about before, and they can be really, really hard on themselves, and they don't live up to it, and their self-esteem continues to struggle and continues to struggle and continues to go down. And all we want to do is for our kids to feel and act like a kid again. We just want our kids to be happy. We want our kids to be moving through life at ease, and that doesn't mean that they don't have their challenges. It means that they overcome them with the attitude that they can, and that they can continue to move forward like they should. So that's really what we're talking about, is how do we help kids just be kids again? How do we help them get over a lot of the challenges of getting stuck within their own nervous system and not being able to adapt? And that's where these tips and tools come in. And the number one thing I'll tell you is that without a balanced nervous system, none of these other things work to the efficiency that they should be. So if we get stuck in a fight or flight state, if our nervous system gets subluxated to a point that it's continually processing through a lens of stress, if we're continuously perceiving stress when we aren't necessarily in a stressful state, everything else runs through that lens of stress. And so we always start with chiropractic. We always start with, where do we sit on that scale of fight or flight and rest and digest? And when we know that, and when we can start to bring calm back into their nervous system, and we can start to ease them back into this mode of the nervous system called rest and digest, right? Parasympathetics, it's that rest and relaxation where they just get to be happy within their system. That's when everything else works better. So what else can we be doing once we've achieved that? Well, big thing we can do is start to create some routines, right? Help your kids get organized and prioritize their own lives and their own situations so that they don't have to worry about the next thing that's coming on a moment by moment basis. They can sit down and go, okay, I know exactly what my schedule is. I know what my time frames are going to be within this, within this scenario. And you don't have to worry about them constantly either. So creating routines is a huge benefit for kids that deal with and struggle with anxiety. The next thing you can be doing is looking at chaos, right? When our brains are cluttered, when our environment is cluttered around us and our brains become cluttered, it becomes really hard to prioritize our own thought process. And parents, this is where you get to self-check as well, because if we as parents live an incredibly chaotic life, if our home life is just kind of a mess, if there's stuff everywhere, if our environment is cluttered, and then we as parents run a schedule that's cluttered, it's very easy to pass that stress onto our kids. And if you do a little bit of soul searching yourself, maybe you are trending in that same pattern, or maybe they are trending in the same pattern that you have already lived. We see a lot of kids that deal with anxiety live in a household with a parent that deals with high anxiety as well. So if that's the case, we'd love the opportunity to work with you too. But really, how do we limit the chaos that they're dealing with on a moment-by-moment basis? The last one I want to talk about here is movement. When your body moves, it's actually a natural stress relief for your system, because that movement is nourishment. It's almost like fuel for your brain, right? So all of the different joints in your entire body have what's called proprioceptors, different mechanoreceptors in them. And when things move properly, your brain gets this flood of good information saying that everything is as it should be. That's another piece where chiropractic can play so pivotally in the health and balance of your nervous system, is that when things don't move properly, it fires a different type of mechanoreceptor called nociception, which creates more stress into your brain. So chiropractic has like a twofold benefit here. Not only does it in itself reduce stress to your nervous system, reduce subluxation patterns, and help your brain create that calm state, but it also helps your body move better, which enhances your ability to nourish your nervous system and nourish your brain with great positive motion and positive stress relief through good proprioception through your body as well. So one thing that we look at, and I'm going to move my picture out of the way here so we can see what this says. If I can get it right in the middle down here. But this is what a scan looks like in our office, and that the biggest action step that we can give you to help combat anxiety and stress with kids is to find out whether or not their scans look like the one on the left of your screen up here. This scan up here that shows all of the red and blue temperature imbalances is a nervous system that's subluxated to the point that it isn't able to physiologically function normally anymore. And if that's the case, then your brain is constantly processing through that state of stress. So we never guess, we test in our office when we're working with kids. Doesn't matter if they're coming in just on a well check or if their parents have some more significant concerns. We always start with a set of neurological scans to find out what state of stress and what state of subluxation is the nervous system in when we start. You see, there's a lot of stress that's happening in a nervous system that's incapable of controlling temperature. This is a thermal scan. The scan actually rolls straight up your spine, taking temperature on the skin on both sides. And a big imbalance means there's a big imbalance in blood flow, which means the body is just not regulating the way that it should. And the scan over on the right-hand side is a scan that is wonderfully balanced. It's a nervous system that is free of